Billionaire Heiress mocked a black CEO. Hours later, the CEO took over her entire empire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Security! Get her out! She doesn't belong at this table, not someone like that. The words detonated across the ballroom like crystals shattering on marble. Dozens of heads turned, forks froze. A chandelier trembled above the room as if even the light recoiled from the venom in her voice. At the center of it all sat the black woman in the pink gown, calm, spine straight, hands resting lightly near a half-filled glass. She didn't flinch. Not once. Her stillness was almost defiant in its quiet precision. Across from her, the billionaire heiress in the red dress surged forward, fingers stabbing the air like a blade of polished gold. Her voice carried the practiced cruelty of someone who had never been corrected a day in her life. By sunrise, you're broke. Do you hear me? Broke. The man seated between them, tuxedo crisp, eyes wide, blinked like someone watching a slow-motion car crash he had no power to stop. His posture tilted away from the heiress and toward the woman in pink, as though some instinct told him he was witnessing a mistake so monumental it would echo. The ballroom, draped in candle-lit white linen and gold trim, fell into an electric silence. Strings from the orchestra wavered mid-note, dissolving into the air like startled birds. Phones rose one by one, their screens glowing, predatory and eager. People were no longer guests at a gala. They were spectators at an execution. The heiress leaned even closer, perfume sharp as accusation. Who invited you? Who told you you deserved to sit with major donors? Her words stretched, slow and vicious. You should be serving plates, not touching them. A few gasps escaped the nearest table. A forced laugh flickered somewhere in the back. Someone whispered, "This is going too far." But no one intervened. Not yet. The woman in the pink dress, the one they assumed was powerless, lifted her gaze at last. And everything shifted. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't pleading. They were cold, precise, terrifyingly composed, the kind of eyes that belonged not to prey but to a storm calculating where to land. A single droplet of water slid down the stem of her glass, tapping the tablecloth with a soft, rhythmic tick. It sounded like a countdown. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The heiress scoffed, mistaking silence for surrender. Look at you, she sneered. Quiet because you know I'm right. But the woman wasn't quiet out of fear. She was measuring the room, measuring the arrogance, measuring the cost. The heiress inhaled sharply, ready to unleash another insult. And then the woman in pink spoke for the first time, not loudly, not emotionally. Just a single sentence, delivered with surgical calm, slicing through the ballroom the way truth slices through privilege. Are you sure you know who you're talking to? It was the kind of question that doesn't ask for an answer. It warns of one. And though the heiress didn't understand it yet, everyone at that table had just witnessed the moment the ground shifted underneath her empire, a quiet tremor that would soon become ruin. Silence didn't just fall over the ballroom, it tightened, like a cinched thread pulling every breath inward. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Not the waiter mid-pour, not the couple frozen in their half-smile, not the man between the heiress and the woman in pink, whose expression had drifted from shock to something closer to dread. The heiress straightened, emboldened by the quiet. She mistook it for compliance, for validation, the kind the privileged often hear even when no one speaks. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she said, sweeping her gaze across nearby tables. "You all know exactly what I mean. Standards matter. Tables like these matter." A ripple passed through the crowd, not agreement, not disagreement, just the uncomfortable shuffle of people who suddenly wished they were somewhere else. The orchestra, unsure whether to continue, attempted a soft return. The violins crept in like timid apologies, but the music felt wrong now, out of place in the suffocating tension. Near the centerpiece of white roses, condensation trailed down a wine carafe, falling in slow, deliberate drops. Each sound seemed amplified, tick, 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 as if the room were counting down to something no one could yet name. But they felt it. A shift. A subtle drop in temperature, the kind that doesn't come from air vents but from awareness. A collective intuition murmuring, "Something here is not what it seems." The heiress leaned back toward the woman in pink, voice lower but sharper. "You should have known better," she hissed. "People like you don't get seats you didn't earn." At another table, someone exhaled sharply, not in laughter, in alarm. The woman in the pink dress didn't react, not to the insult, not to the stares, not to the growing chorus of murmurs threading through the room. Instead, her gaze drifted slowly, almost tenderly, across the ballroom, over the chandeliers shimmering like frozen constellations, over the tables draped in ivory linen, over the faces filming her humiliation for entertainment. She wasn't assessing threats, she was measuring witnesses. Her fingers brushed the surface of her glass, gathering a thin ring of condensation. The movement was small, but the man beside her stiffened as if head sensed an unseen pressure building in the room. Then she exhaled. Not heavily, not dramatically, just a quiet breath, as controlled as a measured heartbeat. A breath that told the room she was done tolerating the performance. The heiress smirked at the silence triumph, dripping from her posture. "There it is," she said. "That's the look of someone who finally understands her place." But the woman in pink lifted her eyes again, and for the first time, the heiress faltered. Because this time, the gaze wasn't cold. It was decisive. Not anger, not fear, not humiliation. Just a clarity so sharp it seemed to slice the distance between them. The murmurs scattered. A fork clattered somewhere. Someone whispered, "Oh no, she's not just anyone." The man between them swallowed hard, realizing too late what the heiress had provoked. And still the woman said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was a warning. A quiet, gathering force that hinted at consequences far larger than any of them could imagine. By the time the next droplet of condensation struck the tablecloth, the ballroom already felt off balance, as if the room itself understood it had taken the wrong person's side. And the heiress, oblivious in her triumph, had no idea. The very moment she believed she'd won was the moment the ground beneath her empire began to crack. The heiress' smug smile lingered in the air long after her words faded, floating there like cheap perfume overstaying its welcome. She believed the room was hers, the chandeliers, the donors, the legacy, the power. But she wasn't looking closely enough. If she had, she might have noticed the way the man beside her, the one caught between privilege and the storm gathering at his left, kept stealing glances at the woman in pink. Not because she seemed out of place, but because she didn't. There was something about her presence, something too steady, too composed, too anchored to belong to someone intimidated by wealth. The heiress mistook this for meekness. The room mistook it for restraint. Both were wrong. The truth of who she was and what she controlled had been kept deliberately invisible, not out of shame, out of strategy. Her name, whispered only in boardrooms that mattered, was Adira Cole. A name that carried more weight in global markets than in social circles. A name that rarely appeared in photographs, but often appeared in mergers. A name every CEO feared hearing in sentences that began with effective immediately. She had built her empire like a ghost builds legend, without noise, without spectacle, without reliance on anyone's validation. 15 years ago, she'd been dismissed in a lobby meeting by a bank executive who told her women like you should start smaller. She started a capital firm instead, then a tech portfolio, then a logistics chain, then a renewable grid, then a private acquisition syndicate that could swallow companies whole without leaving crumbs. What she built didn't glitter like the heiress dress. It pulsed beneath cities. By 38, she owned silent, controlling stakes in more industries than the Windsor family had attended galas. By 40, she had become the person governments called when budgets collapsed. By 42, she had written checks that shifted entire markets. And now, at 45, she sat quietly at a table where a woman born into wealth dared to tell her she hadn't earned her seat. But the most exquisite twist, the one fate itself must have smirked at, was the stake the heiress didn't know she was dangling. Tonight's gala wasn't just charity. It was a mask. Behind the glitter and the wine and the performance of generosity lay a truth so fragile the Windsor family couldn't let the world see it. Their empire was cracking. The heiress's father, Richard Windsor, had sunk tens of millions into a tech expansion that hemorrhaged money. Their infrastructure company was drowning in lawsuits. Their creditors were circling, and the family needed a miracle. That miracle was a pending investment, one large enough to save them, stabilize them, and restore the illusion of untouchable legacy. A strategic capital infusion valued at $6.4 billion. And the signature that would approve it? Adira's. Not her assistants, not her legal teams, not her boards. Hers, she had agreed to sign at the gala. Not because they deserved rescuing, but because she believed preserving thousands of jobs mattered more than watching an old empire fall. At least, that had been her belief an hour ago. Before the insults, before the humiliation, before the heiress decided to weaponize her voice in a room she didn't own. Now, the calculus had changed. The heiress thought she had shamed the wrong woman. But what she had really done was declare war on the one person who already held her family's survival between her fingertips. A single decision from Adira Cole could turn Windsor Holdings into dust. And in the soft glow of the ballroom lights, that decision was starting to form. The heiress wasn't finished. Humiliation, once it tasted sweet on her tongue, demanded more. She leaned in, red silk whispering against the edge of the table, her voice dropping into a tone meant to cut where pride lived. "Look at you," she murmured, a poisonous smile curving. "Silent. That's what happens when people forget their place." Her words scattered across the table like shards of broken glass. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One woman bit her lip. A man cleared his throat, as if attempting to signal enough. But arrogance, once unleashed, rarely listens. The heiress tapped her manicured nail against her wine glass, a slow, taunting rhythm. "You should be grateful," she added. "Most people like you never get this close to real power." The irony so sharp it could draw blood hung between them. Adira didn't move. Not a flinch, not a twitch. But inside the stillness, something locked into place. Like a gear sliding into the precise groove it had been waiting for. Her hand drifted toward her phone, not fast, not dramatic, just a subtle movement guided by inevitability. The device rested beside her plate, screen dark, waiting like an instrument built for war disguised as glass. The man seated between them watched the motion with widening eyes. He had the distinct look of someone witnessing the moment before a bomb goes off, not in noise, but in consequence. The heiress saw the gesture and laughed. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Are you calling your ride? Security will escort you out before they even pull up." Adira's fingers brushed the phone. A soft tone awakened the screen. No anger lit her expression. No tremor touched her breath. Only precision, only inevitability. Across the ballroom, a faint draft shifted the candle flames. The chandeliers flickered not enough to be noticed by everyone, but enough to mark the turning of a tide. Somewhere near the back, a waiter paused mid-step, sensing a pressure in the room he couldn't explain. And then Adira spoke. Not loudly, not sharply, just clearly enough that the words landed with the weight of a verdict. "I build empires," she said, her tone level, unflinching, "and I dismantle them the same way, quietly." The heiress blinked, uncertain whether to laugh or recoil. She chose laughter, the wrong choice. "You?" She tossed her hair, dismissive. "You don't even run in the same circles as us." Adira pressed one small command on her phone. A single message, 7 characters. A directive only one team in the world understood instantly. Initiate. The phone vibrated once in confirmation. Somewhere, far beyond the ballroom, across time zones, across markets, across boardrooms, systems began shifting. Access points tightened, capital pipelines rerouted, holdings paused, legal frameworks activated. The first wave of consequences moved like a silent tide. Back in the ballroom, the heiress folded her arms, missing everything. "You see," she said smugly, "nothing happens when you pretend to matter." But something had happened. The air itself had changed, charged, thickened. A man at a neighboring table whispered, "What did she just say?" Another murmured, "Who is she?" The questions fluttered through the crowd like sparks searching for kindling. Adira lifted her gaze at last. Her eyes locked onto the heiress with a calm so absolute it felt like a warning delivered by the universe itself. "You should learn something tonight," she said softly. The heiress tilted her chin stubbornly. "And what's that?" Adira's voice carried the quiet power of a tide that doesn't ask for permission. Power doesn't raise its voice. It pulls the floor out from under you. The man between them inhaled sharply. Because he understood. The floor had already begun to move. The first signal arrived quietly. Not through shouting, not through spectacle, but through the subtle, synchronized vibration of phones across the ballroom. Executives, advisors, socialites, all glancing down at screens they suddenly wished they hadn't checked. The heiress didn't notice. She was too busy enjoying what she believed was victory. But the man seated between them noticed. His screen lit up with a red banner he recognized from emergency market alerts. Windsor Holdings, capital freeze, triggered review, required timestamp, seconds ago. His pulse stumbled. Across the room, a CFO in a charcoal suit went pale as an email subject line flashed. Urgent. Strategic investor withdrawal. Effective immediately. Another guest, a tech founder, gasped softly as a push notification popped across her smartwatch. Cole Syndicate. Acquisitions division entering live audit mode. She lifted her eyes toward the woman in pink, disbelief spreading through her features. "Is that her?" she whispered. A tremor of murmurs moved through the tables. No one could see the servers flaring awake across 3 continents, reassigning liquidity flows and locking accounts tied to Windsor interests. No one could see the legal teams, already on standby for months, receiving the single-word instruction that meant, "Initiate takeover protocol." But they felt the shift. The ballroom's air tightened, as if oxygen itself was bracing. At the center of it, Adira Cole lifted her glass with the calm of someone who had orchestrated collapses before breakfast. The heiress rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop pretending you're doing anything. You're not scaring." Her phone vibrated. She glanced down and froze. Windsor infrastructure. Payment pipeline. Halted Windsor energy. Liability trigger. Activated Windsor capital. Pending review funds. Inaccessible. The color drained from her face as the notifications kept stacking. This has to be a system glitch," she whispered. A man from the finance table shot up from his chair. "It's not a glitch," he said, voice thin. "It's a coordinated freeze." The heiress shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. No one can freeze us. No one has that authority." The man swallowed. "One entity does." Slowly, painfully slowly, his gaze drifted to the woman in pink, her calm, her silence, her stillness. It all made sense now. The heiress' breath hitched. "You—" Her voice cracked. "You didn't." Adira set her glass down, the soft chime striking the room like a gavel. "I warned you," she said quietly. Around the ballroom, advisors scrambled through their devices, their expressions collapsing into horror as more notices arrived. Partnership review. Initiated contract. Diversion. Flagged asset valuations. Suspended, pending audit. A guest whispered, "She's shutting them down," in real time. But Adira didn't need whispers. She didn't need applause. She didn't need fear. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, was almost gentle. "Your family built its empire on inherited momentum," she said, eyes steady on the heiress. "But momentum collapses the moment someone removes the floor beneath it." The heiress staggered back, gripping the edge of her chair. "You can't, Adira. Please, my father, our employees." Adira's gaze didn't harden. It didn't soften. It simply remained true. "Your employees will be fine," she replied. "I'll protect them. What disappears tonight isn't their livelihood." She paused. "It's your illusion." The chandeliers above them flickered, catching the rising panic in the room. And then another vibration. A final notification. This one loud enough for the heiress to read aloud in a trembling whisper. "Windsor Holdings, primary stake acquired, Cole Syndicate, now majority owner." Her voice broke. No, this can't be real." But it was. The empire she mocked from the safety of privilege had just become property of the woman she tried to humiliate. And the collapse had only just begun. Panic rarely arrives with a scream. Sometimes it arrives in silence, a cold, creeping awareness that something irreversible has already happened. That was the silence spreading through the ballroom now. At first, it was subtle. A single gasp near the floral archway. A wine glass slipping from someone's fingers, shattering softly against marble. The pianist missing a key, hands hovering as if unsure whether the music still had permission to exist. Then the murmurs began. Is that real? Did she just take the company? No, no one moves that fast, unless they planned for it. Guests leaned over glowing screens, their faces lit not by the warm gold of chandeliers, but by the cold blue of braking alerts. Windsor stock futures collapse in early trading emergency board meeting. Requested by new majority stakeholder sources, confirm takeover, led by Adira Cole. The last headline traveled like wildfire. Phones tilted, whispers collided. Eyes snapped toward the woman in pink, the woman who had barely spoken a dozen words all evening. The transformation in the room was instant and palpable. Where moments ago people had watched her with smug amusement or detached curiosity, they now looked with awe and fear. A kind of reverence rippled through the tables, a shifting tide of allegiance from the collapsing heiress to the quiet architect of her downfall. The man seated between them, whose shock had matured into comprehension, slowly rose from his chair, instinctively stepping back as though making space for something larger than himself. Adira didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Her attention remained on the heiress, whose knees buckled as her phone continued chirping with alerts, each one a nail in the coffin of her family's legacy. "This can't be happening," she whispered. You can't take everything." Adira's voice was soft, nearly tender. "I didn't take everything." She nodded toward the screens, some guests still clutched with trembling hands. "You lost it the moment you believed your name meant you could treat people as less." The heiress shook her head violently. "No, you planned this. You set me up." Adira cut her off gently. "I had every intention of saving your family tonight. My signature was already cued. All you had to do was be decent." A painful stillness seized the heiress, features a dawning realization not of the empire lost, but of the simplicity of the requirement she failed. A ripple of shame moved through the observing crowd, as if every witness felt implicated in the moment. But not everyone chose shame. A senator near the VIP table stood slowly, lifting his glass toward Adira with deliberate respect. "To integrity," he said quietly. The toast carried, subtle at first, then swelling into a wave as glasses lifted around the room, not all, but enough. Enough to signal a shift in power that no board vote could match. Even the orchestra unsure, trembling resumed in a minor key, strings floating a somber, reverent melody that seemed to belong to her. For the first time, the heiress' voice broke completely. "Please," she begged. "My father, our employees. This company is everything to us." Adira inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried weight rather than emotion. "Your employees," she said, "have already been transferred to secure accounts. Their positions are safe. Their pensions are untouched." A wave of relief passed through several guests with connections to Windsor employees. Adira continued, "What ends tonight isn't their stability. It's your entitlement." The chandeliers flickered again, subtle, trembling as if acknowledging the truth her words carried. And then, almost ceremonially, one final notification chimed across the heiress' phone. Board control majority confirmed. Adira Cole installed as acting chair. Her breath stuttered. "My name, that company, it's everything I've ever had." Adira met her eyes, unbroken. "When the only thing you own is your name," she said softly, "you should guard the dignity attached to it." The room exhaled a collective release of breath, shock, awe, and a dawning understanding. They had just watched an empire fall, not with fire, not with fury, but with consequence. And the woman they had mocked had become the most powerful person in the room. The heiress stood trembling beside her chair, knuckles whitening against the gold trim as if gripping it could somehow anchor her collapsing world. The ballroom seemed to tilt around her, chandeliers swaying, whispers tightening into a noose of scrutiny. Across from her, Adira rose slowly, not with triumph, not with fury, but with the kind of measured poise reserved for surgeons and judges, people whose decisions change the fate of others with a single breath. Every eye followed her ascent. Every heartbeat in the room synchronized to her stillness. The heiress swallowed hard. Adira, please, we can fix this. We can talk. We can undo whatever this is. Adira stepped around her chair, the soft rustle of her pink gown slicing through the quiet. She stopped only inches from the heiress, close enough that the weight of her presence could be felt, but not weaponized. You don't understand, the heiress whispered. My family, this company, it's all I've ever known. That's the problem, Adira replied softly. You believe legacy is a shield. You've never had to earn consequences. The heiress' breath shook. I didn't mean it, anything I said. I was just performing, Adira finished. That's what you've been taught, that your voice carries authority simply because people have always listened. She tilted her head, just slightly. But tonight, they listened to someone else. A murmur ripple passed through the crowd, not loud, but affirming. Even the man who had sat between them earlier lowered his gaze, acknowledging the truth of it. The heiress wiped a tear with the back of her hand, mascara streaking like the smudge of a fading crown. You think I'm a bad person, she whispered. Adira shook her head. I think you've never been challenged, and unchallenged people mistake cruelty for charisma. The words didn't stab, they revealed. The heiress staggered back, staring at her reflection in a nearby silver platter. Her image wavered, distorted, no longer pristine under the ballroom lights. I wasn't supposed to lose, she said in a small, breaking voice. People like you? You're supposed to stay silent? Adira asked calmly. Accept humiliation? Earn your respect by surviving your insults? Each question peeled another layer away until the heiress was left with only truth and trembling. Adira stepped closer, not to threaten, but to end. I wasn't here tonight as your rival, she said. I was here as your last chance. The heiress looked up, eyes wide with desperation. A chance for what? To prove you had grace, Adira answered. To show the world your name meant more than its arrogance. Her voice lowered, almost tender. But you chose spectacle over character. The heiress shook her head violently, stumbling forward, reaching out in a final plea to the crowd. Tell her she can't do this. Anyone tell her she's going too far. But the room didn't move. The crowd that had laughed with her an hour ago now stood still, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They understood the truth. Power hadn't humiliated her. Her choices had. Adira rested her hands lightly on the back of her chair, poised, grounded, unshaken. Your empire isn't gone because of me, she said. It's gone because you never learned how to hold it. The heiress's lips parted, but no words came. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to claim, just the echo of privilege collapsing under the weight of consequence. And the woman she had mocked standing before her as the new architect of everything she once owned. The collapse didn't roar. It spread a quiet, precise unraveling that moved through the city like a tide reversing its course. It began with the headlines. Within minutes, every major financial network cut into live broadcasting. Anchors blinked at the teleprompters as new text scrolled in, urgent enough to override scripted segments, stunning enough to disrupt the political news cycle. Cole Syndicate executes surprise takeover of Windsor Holdings, Harris losses estimated in the billions, sources claim incident at gala triggered rapid shift. Words like surprise, collapse, audit, majority control ricocheted across ticker boards. Images leaked grainy cell phone footage of the heiress leaning over the table, finger jabbing, voice rising, Adira sitting still as a stone carved by intention. Clips spread faster than explanation. The most viral was only 5 seconds long, the heiress shouting, "She doesn't belong here," followed by the camera swinging to capture Adira's calm, unreadable gaze. A silence so heavy followed in the video that viewers swore they felt it through their screens. The internet crowned it, the look that ended a dynasty. By the time the gala spilled into the night air, thousands had already seen it. By dawn, millions. Inside the ballroom, the music had stopped entirely. The orchestra members set down their instruments, exchanging quiet glances as if startled to find themselves part of an unfolding legend. Guests drifted in uneasy clusters. Some whispered apologies they'd never have the courage to say aloud. Others rehearsed statements for reporters, A few simply stared at Adira with the reverence reserved for living myth. Even the chandeliers seemed dimmer now, as if ashamed of the opulence they had lent to cruelty. The heiress remained frozen beside her chair, the red of her gown now too bright, too loud against the disaster it framed. Her breathing came shallow, unsteady. She looked less like a fallen monarch, and more like a child waking from a nightmare she had authored. "My father," she whispered. "Hell, fix this. He always does." But the words cracked under their own weight, because somewhere in the room Shed heard it, the unmistakable notification chime from a guest's phone reporting, "Richard Windsor removed as board chair, pending new ownership review." The heiress swayed. Her father, the man whose name had paved her world, was no longer the one holding the reins. The reins now belonged to the woman she had humiliated. Adira remained standing, serene, the quiet center of a storm she had never needed to raise her voice to command. A journalist slipped into the ballroom, breathless, camera in hand. Security moved to intercept him, but not before he captured a single frame. Adira, standing with her hand on the back of her chair, the heiress wilted before her, and the room around them suspended between collapse and revelation. That image would become iconic. Meanwhile, Windsor Holdings' global branches scrambled. In London, traders stared at blinking red screens. In Singapore, analysts tried to calculate the depth of the takeover. In New York, the night shift at the financial district huddled around monitors, murmuring the same sentence: this wasn't hostile. It was inevitable. Competitor firms issued internal memos warning employees not to comment publicly. Regulators requested documents. Partners retracted commitments. The dominoes fell with elegance, the unmistakable signature of Adira's strategic mind. None of it was dramatic. All of it was irreversible. Back at the gala, the heiress finally found her voice thin, trembling, clinging to denial. "You ruined everything," she whispered. "You ruined my family. My legacy." Adira did not look away. "No," she said, her tone soft but unyielding. "Your choices ruined your legacy. I simply refuse to fund the version of you that harmed others." The heiress covered her face, shoulders shaking. For the first time, the crowd looked at her not with loyalty, nor disgust, but with the uncomfortable realization that consequence had finally reached someone who had lived untouched by it. A woman from a nearby table approached Adira hesitantly. "You saved the employees," she said in a low voice. "People won't forget that." Adira gave a small nod, not for praise, for acknowledgement. She hadn't come tonight to destroy anyone, but she also hadn't come to be destroyed. The room understood the difference. As Adira moved toward the exit, guests stepped aside instinctively, forming a path without being asked, not out of fear, but respect. The doors opened, letting in the cool night air. It washed over the ballroom like a reset, like a breath the room had been waiting to take. Behind her, the heiress sank into her chair, the same one she had tried to weaponize, surrounded by the crumbling architecture of a life that had never been built on humility. Ahead of her, Adira stepped into the night, unhurried, unbothered, unbroken. The city glowed beneath the skyline she now owned more pieces of than anyone in that ballroom could comprehend. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the internet, someone typed the sentence that would define the night. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. By morning, the city spoke her name with a different kind of reverence. Not the breathless awe reserved for celebrities. Not the forced respect shown to inherited wealth. But the quiet acknowledgement given to someone who moves the world without demanding witnesses. Adira Cole did not hold a press conference. She did not grant interviews. She did not parade her victory. Instead, she arrived at her office just after sunrise, the sky still painted in muted gold. Her executives were already gathered, waiting. She carried no entourage, no photographers, only a folder under her arm, and the stillness she wore like a signature. Inside that folder were the documents needed to finalize the takeover and something more, a new initiative. She signed the first page without hesitation. The Cole Foundation for Equitable Enterprise, a multi-billion-dollar fund dedicated to supporting women of color navigating workplaces that tried to shrink them. "Build pathways," she told her directors, "not pedestals." Her voice was calm, but its certainty carried the weight of an era shifting. Across the city, the heiress remained hidden from cameras, her world reduced to lawyers and damage reports. There would be time for rebuilding if she chose humility over spectacle. But that journey was hers to make, not Adira's to oversee. By afternoon, the iconic photo from the gala had circled the globe. Adira standing, serene, unshaken, the heiress crumbling under the collapse of her own making. But the caption that resonated most wasn't angry, wasn't triumphant. It was true. Power doesn't shout. It chooses where to stand. As dusk settled, Adira stepped onto her balcony overlooking the city she now quietly influenced. Lights flickered on one by one, offices, homes, people moving through lives she would never meet but hoped to impact. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the evening wind carry the last remnants of the gala away. She hadn't destroyed a dynasty. She had revealed a truth, and sometimes, she thought as she watched the skyline exhale into night, the softest correction becomes the loudest legacy.